How will the war in Iran affect authors? So
We stalled long enough.
if anybody is watching any news at all whatsoever lately, you've been watching Israel pound the absolute crap out
We're
of
not watching the news,
Iran's.
Jonathan. We're monitoring the
We're
situation.
monitoring the situation. Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not spending all day on X. I'm monitoring the situation.
That situation's not going to monitor itself, Jonathan.
Exactly. Yes. So we're watching Israel hit air defense sites and nuclear sites and all kinds of bad guys in the Iranian administration, and we're all going, okay, well, at least that doesn't touch me at all. That may not be the case. You can't. You guys heard of the butterfly effect? A butterfly flaps its wings in Peking, or what we call Beijing now, and a tornado happens over in Kansas. There are tons of ripple effects, especially when you're looking at what people are referring to as regime change or even just regime alteration, because now you're looking at the markets, you're looking at fuel, you're looking at power. We're talking tons of things that affect the way we do our business. Not to mention that when something's in the news, it affects what people either want to read or don't want to read. Thomas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so wars affect the zeitgeist more than anything else other than kind of cycles. So there's the big cycles of history, and second to that are wars. Many of the famous stories that really resonate with us are retellings of wars. So Star Wars, where you have the Rebel Alliance fighting against the evil Empire, and it ends with a giant explosion that's the death of a whole small moon's worth of people because a guy who didn't really want to be a part of the war and didn't see it as his problem comes in at the last minute and saves the day. This is World War II. Right? Like, it's very much World War II. The framing of it, the symbology of it, the reason
The fact it's based on fighter pilots.
the fact that it's based on fighter pilots. So, and that wasn't just true with Star Wars. It was true with a lot of the mid-century stories. Even a lot of the westerns were, from a zeitgeist perspective, retellings of World War II. Nuclear bombs have a big impact on the zeitgeist. But before we get to the zeitgeist stuff, and I know there's a bingo card y'all put together, I have a rule never to look at bingo cards because it stresses me out, but I know that zeitgeist is on it. It's fun. I'm 100%
Thomas
for bingo cards.
Out.
I try not to look at them also to make it more fun, make the game more fun. So those of you in the comments, you can share where to find the bingo card. So let's talk about economic impacts first. I think that's the easier to break down, and then we'll go from there. So if you look at just what's happened in the last week, and if you ask AI about the last week, it'll talk about how oil prices have gone up 15-20%, and that sounds really scary. But if you look at a chart of oil prices over the last year, they've actually been dropping since the beginning of the year. The drill, baby drill policies have been coming into effect. And now the oil prices have gone back up to where they were in April. And so we've lost about 3 months worth of drill, baby drill progress in pulling oil prices down. And so you'll hear about how high energy prices can lead to inflation and a lot of knock-on effects. And it absolutely can, because energy touches products at multiple points, right? So it takes energy to cut down the trees. It takes energy to move the cut down trees to the pulping machine. It takes energy to run the pulping machine. It takes energy to turn the pulp into paper, right? Like, it takes energy to turn the paper into books, right? All of those things take energy. And as energy prices go up, it can have this cascading impact on prices. That said, Iran specifically doesn't sell energy on the market. So we've had like all the sanctions, because the solution for Iran for the last 30 years, basically my whole life, or since I was like 5 years old, was sanctions. So they sell basically all of their oil to China directly. And so nobody buys oil from Iran other than China and some of their neighbors, perhaps. But it does affect global demand, because if China doesn't buy their oil from Iran, they'll buy it from somebody else. So it's not completely isolated, but the bigger concern is the Strait of Hormuz. So 30% of the world's oil all goes by this really narrow choke point that Iran is neighbors. And in the past, they have shut down that choke point. And I think it's important to tell the story of what happened the last time they shut down the choke points. It had a huge impact on energy prices, and I think almost everyone has forgotten this story, and it's a fun story. So I'm going to tell it.
Yay, fun story.
So they put mines in the Strait of Hormuz, and they said, this is closed. Well, the United States did a freedom of navigation operation in the Strait of Hormuz because nobody tells us where we can and cannot sail our boats. And one of our cruisers, sure enough, hits one of those mines and blows a hole right in the middle of it. Pops the key, breaks the keel. Everyone thinks this cruiser is going to sink. And so the United States Navy phones up the president and says, we've been attacked. Can we respond? The president meets with his attorneys and his advisors, and he says, yes, but the response has to be proportional. So they give the Navy very clear instructions. Here's an Iranian cruiser. You can only attack this Iranian cruiser, but you can return fire if you're fired upon. Well, the United States Navy went, blew up that cruiser, but then the pilots, on returning to the aircraft carrier, buzzed every Iranian ship they could. And every time the Iranians couldn't help themselves, they would fire on the airplanes. The airplanes would circle around and sink that ship as well. And the result was the United States Navy destroyed, it's like 50% of Iran's whole Navy in like 6 hours. And they took the letter of the law from the president, and they drove a battleship right through it. Because this was long enough ago when they actually had battleships still. So the president was Reagan, who was really pressuring them to be proportional. And so the United States Navy was very, very proportional. And the kind of interesting thing about the story is it turns out that cruiser that had its keel blown open didn't actually sink. They did such a good job salvaging it that they were able to tow it into port and repair it, and it continued having the rest of its service life.
It's because there was 3 E3s in the bottom of that ship, desperately bailing water like the Three Stooges.
So Americans have forgotten this story. I suspect for many of you, this is the first time you've heard this story. But I tell you who has not forgotten this story, and it's Iran. They remember the story very well because it was the 6 hours where they lost half of their navy. And their ability to close the Strait of Hormuz has not been enhanced since that time. And our ability to prevent them from closing the Strait of Hormuz has. And so you'll hear a lot of fear. A lot of the energy prices going up is due to the fear of the Iranians closing the Strait of Hormuz. I do not think they can do that, especially with 2 carrier groups in the area. I think even if they were to try, even the attempt would be unsuccessful, but I don't think they want to try. Because the other thing that either we attacked or we almost attacked was Iranian oil refinery. So right now, it's been understood the Israelis are not attacking any Iranian oil processing. And so they haven't actually lost any capacity because the goal here isn't to destroy the people or even the economy. These are very, very surgical strikes. But they could, and the Americans could. Those, oil burns really well. It's very hard to defend from kinetic strikes.
We like explosions.
I think that the fears of inflation and the fears of oil and energy-related price increases are overblown as long as nobody targets Iran's actual oil production. I don't think the Strait of Hormuz fears are well-founded. And so those parts, which I think is what most people are focusing on, the economic part, I don't think is actually the big story here. I think the big story is cultural and zeitgeist.
I'm a self-defense instructor. I teach basically kids how to defend themselves. I teach women how to defend themselves. And it seems like every year and a half, couple of years, I have a Jewish student. He's a Messianic Jewish kid. And he was super nice when I started with him, and now he's a little bit more like me. But I have to teach him every year and a half, 2 years, how to defend himself because there is another spike in anti-Semitism where people are just looking for Jews to target. And I mean, this kid wears the tassels. If you know what you're looking for, you know how to target a Jew. And so I'm having to teach him how to defend himself, how to keep his head in the swivel, look around, see who's looking at you too long. If it's a 15-year-old girl, awesome, go for that. If it's a 45-year-old man, you should probably, and he has buddies, you should probably either leave the area or go to a group of people. And that is something that we're going to have to look at here because everyone is taking sides right now. Israel is striking Iran, and for some reason we've trained ourselves to believe that every aggressor is the bad guy. If you throw the first punch, you're automatically the bad guy. You're the bully, and that's not how that works in real life. However, regardless of where you fall on this, you need to understand the way your audience is going to react to these real life events and how that will play into the stories that you have. Okay, if people think that, for instance, in conservative evangelicals, Israel is the blessed nation, consecrated by God, and we have to protect them because blessed be, he that blesses you and stuff like that. Then you have the other end of the extreme where Israel has been, pounding the Palestinians for decades and depriving them of their needs and basically putting them under siege. And, you have to look at it the way your audience looks at it. And you have to be really careful about alienating parts of your audience if you're going to become vocal on this topic, and then if your story is going to drive people away.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. Worldcon, which is a
Extreme
sci-fi convention that just gets tons of press for doing crazy things, uninvited a Jewish agent just this week. And we have an Israeli flag out in front of our house, and we'll have people driving by with really angry honking, which is about as bad as it gets here in Texas.
It's Austin, okay? They're not necessarily known for their lethality.
so there is a shift in zeitgeist. I will say a couple of things you could do right now if you're wanting to take advantage of this. Any kind of like quick turn explainer on Iran, Israel, energy, the Red Sea, anything kind of helping give people context, I think could be really popular. A Tom Clancy style novel about the Strait of Hormuz event, right? Like that's a exciting story. It's the Navy's like most interesting thing they've done in the last 50 years. And I think that's actually probably accurate because the Navy mostly goes around scaring people. So the Navy's really scary.
Yeah.
But this time
you don't know how scary the Navy is.
Any given aircraft carrier is something like the 10th largest air force in the world. So it's like the 10th largest air force in the world. Just one aircraft carrier is just parked off your coast. It's very, very scary. So any kind of historical fiction taking place in that area, I think that sort of thing could be really popular. But nuclear bombs really change the zeitgeist. And if Iran is able to destroy Tel Aviv, which is their goal, I mean, they're bombing hospitals there, they're bombing residential areas. They've stated that Israel is a one-bomb nation. Right? It's not like the United States where there's lots of cities and the major... United States is pretty resistant actually to bombs because our financial hub is separate from our shipping hub. So the financial hub is New York, shipping hub is Chicago. Our international shipping hub is LA. Our political hub is Washington, D.C. Our other international shipping hub is Los Angeles, New Orleans. Right, so we're very diversified. In Israel, it's all in Tel Aviv. Like Israel doesn't even control all of Jerusalem. Like Jerusalem is very significant, but there's no real concern someone's going to blow up Jerusalem. That's not really on the table. But Tel Aviv getting destroyed is absolutely on the table. And so there's kind of four scenarios I see, and each one could have varying impacts on the zeitgeist. So if Israel is successful and keeps the Iranians from developing a bomb, I think that this war is going to have very small, very limited impact, especially if Israel does it all on their own. Because violence in the Middle East, there's always violence in the Middle East. Most people can't find Iran on a map. They couldn't tell you the difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is very offensive to Iranians and Saudis.
It's offensive to me.
They're not just different peoples ethnically, but they're different religions. Or different sects of the same religion, and they're different axes on a geopolitical conflict. So if the United States intervenes and succeeds, I think you could see a zeitgeist shift because the Americans haven't felt like they've won a war in a really long time. We see war as this like really expensive thing that kind of can't be won because the Afghanistan and Iraq conflicts weren't really winnable. We didn't have really clear objectives. And it was just
they were long-term victory conditions, and so it's really difficult.
Hearts and Minds is not an objective. Like
yes, it is because
the United States still
when it's two in the heart and one in the mind, that's an easy short-term.
The Union still has not won hearts and minds in the South of the United States. It's been 150 years of occupation. It's like that's not a good goal.
But I've talked to guys who were like in Afghanistan and they spent 20 years building schools and they saw progress and they saw Afghanistan women being able to be educated and be able to look forward to having their own lives and stuff like that. That's the long-term objective we were doing, and then we just didn't have the stamina for it. We don't have the finances, we don't have the stamina, and we didn't do enough to bring the people up to that standard. So the problem is that we didn't have the stamina for the objective we were trying to achieve. And I think that's a big deal that's going on in Iran right now, is we're trying to figure out what the objective would be. Everyone keeps throwing around the terms regime change, and everyone just hears Iraq all over again. We're going to be in another Middle Eastern country for another 20 years, and everyone's like, stay away from that. We don't want to do that. The the problem that we're going to have here is we have exhaustion. We are tired.
Which is something that you can speak to in your fiction.
Yes.
So while we're talking about these things, these are core emotional states of just feeling fatigued. Nothing I ever do ever works, right? That feeling isn't just a generalized feeling for the nation. It's also a specific feeling of people working in a big corporate job and they don't feel like they're having much impact. And it's what drives people to certain kinds of fiction. So for instance, if I'm feeling like I'm working in a corporate job and nothing I ever do ever makes a difference, I'm going to be drawn to fantasy. I'm going to be drawn to fiction with a really powerful, world-changing protagonist whose decisions matter, right?
Or Fight Club.
If I don't, or that, but I think that what we're seeing with readers, and we're going to get to this in a second, because we have a whole breakdown of what's going on in the fantasy market, and its money is falling from the heavens, is that people are longing for that fantasy protagonist whose decisions matter. As
one chosen one who can change everything.
Right. And the story's always about the chosen one, right? It's never about the soldier on the front lines just trying to make it, right? It's always about he may start the story as a peasant boy, but he ends the story as a king, right?
But on that though, is that's really important right now as side stories, because we're talking about Helldivers again. In the Super Earth Invasion, we got a new NPC in the game, the little Sith soldiers that would run around and help you shoot stuff. And there is a whole fan fiction comics market forming off of Helldivers trying to save the Sith soldiers, the little conscripts. And it's a whole spin-off because everyone feels for them.
We aspire to be the world-changing protagonist, but we relate to the lonely Sith soldier who's in a world and a war way over his head, with decisions that are not that he has no impact on, but absolutely have an impact on him.
I have watched so many reels and shorts and full-on YouTube videos of players who are staying on the planet when they could evacuate because they won't leave their NPCs. Okay? Then there is something here you need to grab onto as an author. Okay? Your side characters will make your story. Your chosen one you need to have your chosen one, right? But you also need to have your side characters. You need to have the ones that people are relating to. For instance, I'm writing a fantasy series and it has a multi-generational conflict in it. Well, how does a civilian population respond to a multi-generational conflict? Well, you think about, when is my son going to be sent to the war? You know, you can look at Ukraine and how they're kidnapping kids to send them to the front lines. You know, you look at these we call them human stories, but you don't think about those stories because we live in America and we're safe from that stuff. But if you can visualize what it would be like to be in the 8th generation of a war against inhuman invaders, and you have to hide your son so that he can make it for as long as possible, if for nothing else than just to bring in the next harvest so your family doesn't starve, you have a very compelling side story that your protagonist can learn about, because he's on big chosen one stuff. That's what he focuses on. And suddenly he sees what the common man is struggling through, and it can inform the way that he becomes a hero. And suddenly you have a very compelling story that reaches everyone, because you get the world change that people are craving, but you're also getting that they feel heard, they feel listened to, and they feel understood. And that's something that's really important when it comes to fiction.
And I would also encourage you to study the 100 Years' War. We really did have a war that went on for 100 years. What does that even look like? What's the impact on a nation?
Yeah.
How do you survive? And right in the middle of that 100 Years' War was a pandemic that killed a third of the population. And it didn't end the war. The armies both just got smaller.
Hatred is resilient.
It's like, can we take a break for the bubonic plague? No break for the bubonic plague. The war must
Why
go
do you
on.
think there's a castle every mile in Europe?
So if you write nonfiction, you and your platform touches on like politics or faith or culture, you may be expected to pick a team by your readers, especially if you're active on social media. So some quick guidelines here. If you support Israel, talk about nuclear proliferation. Talk a lot about how Iran can't have a nuclear bomb. Talk about the international treaties that all the nuclear powers agree that no more nations get nuclear bombs. Everybody's agreed on this, and kind of talk about how all the world agrees no nuclear bombs for Iran. If you support Iran, you want to use the word Zionist a lot. And
So
you want to
much.
try to deflect away from Iran, and you want to talk about Israel as much as possible.
Yeah.
If you support isolation, you want to talk about poor Americans as
Yeah.
much as you can. You want to talk about the national debt. You want to talk about forever wars, and you want to and be as vague as possible.
So you would really enjoy the Tucker Carlson versus Ted Cruz thing that recently went down. Share those shorts because Tucker Carlson is very isolationist, at least in the way he's been doing his rhetoric recently, and the way that he angled his questions towards Senator Cruz was about why are we focusing on other countries? Why aren't we focusing on poor Americans and homelessness? And why isn't Congress in charge of DC? And all these questions. Ted Cruz is a very global guy. He's thinking about Iran. He's thinking about all these other things. So if you're into isolationism, you need to understand who's talking about the things you want to talk about, that you want your audience to hear about, and you need to try to I don't know if you've seen this before. A guy on a bicycle will grab the back of a truck and will ride it for a while. That's kind of what you want to do. You want to steal some of someone else's energy or their audience or stuff like that, and use it to maintain your own momentum.
Now, if you write fiction, my recommendation, just write fiction. Stay focused on thrilling your readers with your stories. Don't bother with the news. The politics that matters in your book is between the elves and the dwarves, or between the Klingons and the Romulans. Stay in your fantasy world and try not to get too distracted by the news.